the Novokuznetsk Monster, who lured 82 children and adults inside his apartment and no one came out alive. He was the cannibal of Siberia. Alexander Spesivtsev, nicknamed Sasha, was born in Siberia on March 1, 1970. His father was an alcoholic, and his mother, Lyudmila, worked at a nearby school. He had a sister, Nedesta. Lyudmila was always very affectionate towards her children, but her husband was abusive and violent and would often torture his family and simultaneously cheat her. Lyudmila lived with him for 15 years until she got fed up with this abusive relationship and finally divorced him. Alexander lived with his mother in a small apartment building in the Soviet era on the 9th floor of 357 Pinsky. Alexander Spesivtsev was born underweight. He was weak and sick, but luckily survived. He had a history of health concerns and would often remain ill. He had a sadistic nature and would spend most of the day alone. In school, he was constantly being subjected to bullying. His mother would always take care of him, and both would sleep on the same bed until he was 12. Novokuznetsk was an industrial city in Siberia, plagued by social problems during the 80s and 90s. Winters were extremely harsh, and it was challenging to survive in such cold temperatures. Unemployed children often lived on the streets and begged for money and food. Some of them ran away from their homes due to their strict fathers, who wanted them to find work to earn money. Lyudmila found work at a local government school and was in charge of the maintenance staff, but was accused of stealing the plumbing equipment from the school property. She was sacked and kicked out of the job. It didn't take her much time to find another job as a legal secretary in a solicitor's office. After a few months, she was joined in the public prosecutor's office by her daughter Nedesta, who was employed there. Both women were respected by the staff, but never associated with their work colleagues. They would mostly spend their free time together and leave quickly after working hours. The apartment contained a bedroom, living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. People in the neighborhood would often help each other, but the Spesivtsev family had a weird attitude towards everyone, so no one ever approached them. Lyudmila would steal things and then sell them to earn money. Alexander followed her and was captivated by the criminal cases. She would bring crime scene and corpse images home to show them to Alexander. She would share details of the crime stories with her son, and both would write down details and stick their favorite images in the scrapbook. Alexander's interest in these bloody and wounded dead bodies was growing. He would read these criminal cases and would explain photographic material of corpses. Despite being sick and weak, he found these crime stories fascinating. Lyudmila would often hate other healthy and active children because her own son was feeble. Alexander also started hating children when he saw them running around the streets and playing. She would often panic and feel sad for her son and question why her son can't have a normal life. Their neighbors looked down on them, which enraged her even more. Alexander would see his mother despising these kids and develop the same feelings. In 1988, at the age of 18, Alexander was wholly engrossed with the criminal cases and images of dead bodies. The family would discuss the cases while having dinner, as both mother and son were obsessed with them. In 1991, Lyudmila and Nedesta moved close to their workplace. Lyudmila believed that 21 years old Alexander could now live on his own, but she had doubts that he won't be able to find a sufficient job for himself. Lyudmila often visited Alexander and brought food and money for him. Alexander felt alone and soon got himself a Rottweiler dog. One day, while taking his dog for a walk, he met a 17-year-old woman, Evgenia. She was an attractive girl. He would offer her roses and chocolates and also write poems for her. Soon they developed feelings for each other. Lyudmila was very happy for her son. She would visit him once in a week or two, but this bothered Alexander because he always wanted his mother to pay more attention to him than leave him for a long time. After a few months, Alexander and Evgenia argued over something, leading him to losing control. That day he beat her up. Evgenia wasn't expecting that and finally decided not to tolerate his violent behavior. She cried bitterly and affirmed that she wanted this relationship to end. This enraged Alexander and he started beating her harder. He locked her in the room and would continuously torture her. Evgenia's body was filled with bruises and wounds. He always played loud music to camouflage her screams and beat her until she went unconscious. On the other hand, Evgenia's parents were worried about her disappearance. They contacted the police and told them that she was living with Alexander, but they had no idea where he lived. The police finally found Alexander's apartment, but he refused to unlock the doors. The police had to break the doors to enter. They found Evgenia bedridden with serious health issues. She was quickly moved to the hospital, where doctors revealed that she won't be able to survive as she developed sepsis. Her body was in such terrible condition that it was hard for doctors to determine the cause of her death. Alexander was charged for the murder of Evgenia at age 21. He was assigned to a psychiatric hospital where he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. An episode embittered Alexander during his commitment at the Oriol hospital. He asked another patient to insert a metal ball into his urethra to make him more virile. This had the opposite effect, causing erectile dysfunction and genital pains. After 3 years, he was discharged as doctors were satisfied with his progress. The hospital staff made a huge mistake by not completing the necessary papers for his discharge. According to the incomplete document, he was still in the psychiatric facility. This became the deadliest mistake and caused catastrophes that would never be forgotten. Once out, he began associating with transients and beggars and developing a deep-seated hatred of street children, whom he viewed as a byproduct of Russia's emerging democracy. He was looking for revenge against the whole world. After his release, he went back to his apartment. He would spend time meeting beggars and the homeless, offering them drinks or smokes, and sharing his views on democracy and international politics. He would steal things like stereo equipment to sell on the black market for extra cash. He gathered information regarding how many youngsters grew up on the street and even unattended children because their parents were busy finding jobs. A frightful animosity inside this monster for capitalism was growing. He planned to spill antagonism and resentment over these innocent children roaming around the street. Every smiling and playing child would remind him of his miserable childhood. Lyudmila joined him in his crime, and both would often take children and beggars to their homes, which alerted the neighbors. The neighbors noticed that he would play old loud music on the long summer days. This was raising lots of concerns. He was now luring adults to his apartment, and as soon as they would enter, he would play loud music. He tortured them, killed them, and sometimes cannibalized them. Lyudmila would dispose of unwanted remains by throwing them from buckets into the Aba River late at night. One of the neighbors contacted the authorities, complaining about the smell and noise coming from the apartment. However, the police didn't pay attention to the call as the country was transitioning from Soviet authority to the new Russia. Alexander was often seen walking around the neighborhood with his Rottweiler dog looking for the next victim. The first sign of his victims arose when the decaying heads, torsos, and arms of unidentifiable children were found washed up on the banks of the River Aba. Investigators suspected it to be a serial killer or organ smuggler. Several criminal gangs from the Caucasus region were active in Novokuznetsk at the time, and police searched the baggage of outward flights. Hundreds of internal troops and police officers were deployed to search for the killer. The news regarding lost children circulated in the area. This is when witnesses came out and said they found the missing girls leaving with Lyudmila. This helped police identify her. One morning, the neighborhood police officer and a plumber complained that a resident refused to let them in his apartment to relieve a clog. The resident claimed he was mentally ill and kept in his apartment. This alarmed police as they believed Lyudmila's son was still at the hospital in Oriol. The two men broke the door to enter the apartment, where they smelled an intense and disgusting odor, like something was rotting. They found a bleeding woman with a severe stab wound in her chest, and a decapitated, delimbed torso was uncovered in the bathtub. Alexander climbed the roof and escaped that day, but was arrested within the week. During the investigation, the police found Alexander's diary, where he wrote details about his crimes. He didn't deny his actions when captured. He confessed only to 19 murders and boasted of crimes that couldn't be proven. During the search of his apartment, 80 articles of bloody clothing, nearly 40 jewelry items, and some photos of unknown people who were possibly unproven victims were found. Police experts later concluded the garments belonged to the 19 victims. He was ruled insane by a court and committed to a psychiatric hospital and had previously been confined to a mental institution for 3 years after torturing and killing his girlfriend. The only living and last victim and witness, 15-year-old Olga Galtseva, died the following day after being discovered. Today, Spesivtsev resides at the Kamyshin Regional Hospital. His mother was charged with conspiracy to 3 murders and was sentenced to 13 years in prison. That's a wrap for today. Don't forget to smash the thumbs up, share, and subscribe to the channel to see our latest content.